The Galactic Interspecies Academy for Advanced Studies had seen many things in its 400 cycles of operation. It had seen species from across 17 sectors come together to learn, to grow, to occasionally set the chemistry lab on fire through creative interpretations of safety protocols. What it had not seen in all those cycles was a human volunteering for the Apex Predator Behavioral Studies course. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Until Marissa Chen walked into Instructor Vexillar's classroom on the first day of the term, grinning like she'd just won a bet with the universe itself. Vexillar, a Threxian with scales that shimmered like oil on water and 4 eyes that could track movement in multiple directions simultaneously, stopped mid-sentence. His prepared welcome speech, polished over decades of teaching, evaporated from his mind like morning dew under a supernova. "You," he said, his translator struggling with the mixture of confusion and concern in his voice, "are aware this is Apex Predator Behavioral Studies, yes?" "Yep," Marissa said, sliding into a seat in the front row. Front row, like she was there for extra credit. Looked fun. Fun. The word hung in the air like a small verbal grenade. Around the classroom, various species shifted uncomfortably. There was Clix, a Vroon whose species had evolved as persistence predators on a high-gravity world and who still looked like they could run down a ground vehicle given enough time. There was Harvest Moon over still waters, a Zentarii whose people had climbed to the top of their food chain through pack hunting and strategic thinking. There was even Ragoth, a Kelveran who stood 7 feet tall and whose homeworld's ecosystem made Dark Souls look like a relaxing vacation simulator. And then there was Marissa Chen, 5'6", approximately 68 kilograms, from Earth. A death world, yes. But she looked like she might struggle to intimidate a particularly assertive houseplant. "Miss Chen," Vexillar began, attempting to salvage this situation before it became another incident he'd have to explain to the Academy Board. This course involves direct interaction with juvenile apex predators from 12 different biomes. These are not domesticated creatures. These are not safe. We have had students leave this course with trauma that required memory therapy. "Cool," Marissa said, pulling out a data pad. "Are those the 12 we'll be working with, or are there rotation species too?" Vexillar's scales rippled in a pattern that his own species would recognize as deep existential confusion. "You understand what an apex predator is, correct?" "Sure," Marissa said cheerfully. "Top of the food chain. Nothing hunts them. They hunt everything else. Got it." "Then you understand that exposure to such creatures triggers profound fear responses in most species, yes?" "Makes sense." "And you still wish to take this course?" "Absolutely." Vexillar looked at her for a long moment, all 4 eyes focusing on her face, searching for signs of deception, bravado, or the kind of stupidity that evolution usually weeded out before breeding age. He found none of those things. What he found was worse. He found genuine, uncomplicated enthusiasm. "Very well," he said, in the tone of someone washing their hands of responsibility for whatever was about to happen. "Let us begin." The first 3 weeks of the course were mostly theoretical. Classifications of predatory behavior, hunting strategies across different evolutionary pressures, the psychology of fear responses and how they kept prey species alive. Standard stuff, really, if you ignored the fact that half the class was physiologically capable of tracking you by scent alone, and the other half had to actively suppress their predatory instincts when anything moved too quickly in their peripheral vision. Marissa took notes. She asked questions. She was, by all observable metrics, an excellent student, which is why Vexillar should have seen what was coming. The practical portion of the course began in week 4, when the class was introduced to the facility's first juvenile specimen, a 6-month-old Thoraxian ridge stalker named Chomps. The name, Vexillar explained with what could only be described as excessive patience, had been given by the previous cohort and was technically inappropriate, given that Thoraxian ridge stalkers did not actually chew their prey, but rather swallowed it whole after crushing it with their powerful jaws. But the name had stuck, and now they were all stuck with it. Such was academia. Chomps was, objectively speaking, adorable. If you had no survival instincts whatsoever. He was roughly the size of a large earth dog, covered in mottled gray-green scales, with oversized paws that suggested he'd eventually grow to the size of a small ground vehicle. His eyes were large and yellow and tracked movement with the kind of focus that spoke to millions of years of evolutionary refinement. His mouth, even closed, showed the edges of teeth that had been designed by a universe with a very specific opinion about what belonged inside living things. The Thoraxian ridge stalker, Vexillar announced to the class, which was currently arranged in a careful semicircle around a reinforced enclosure, is an ambush predator from Therax Prime, a Class 12 hazard world. Juveniles of this species begin hunting at 4 months of age and are fully capable of taking down prey 3 times their own size. Our specimen has been raised in captivity, but retains all natural instincts. The purpose of this exercise is to observe predatory behavior patterns and demonstrate proper safety protocols when working with potentially dangerous megafauna. Can we pet him? Marissa asked. The silence that followed was the kind of silence usually reserved for moments right before something historically significant and regrettable happens. No, Vexillar said slowly. You may not pet him. But he's so fluffy. He is scaled. Fluffy is a state of mind, Instructor Vexillar. Ragoth, the 7-foot Kelveran, who looked like he could punch through a bulkhead, leaned over and whispered, She's joking, right? This is human humor, yes? I honestly cannot tell anymore, Vexillar muttered, which was not something an instructor should admit, but there it was. The exercise proceeded. Students were called forward in pairs to observe Chomps from a safe distance, noting his behaviors, his response to stimuli, his hunting posture when a remote-controlled dummy prey was introduced to his enclosure. All very educational, all very carefully controlled. Then it was Marissa's turn. She walked up to the reinforced glass of the enclosure with the confidence of someone approaching a petting zoo. Chomps, who had been dozing in a patch of artificial sunlight, perked up immediately. His head swiveled toward her with the mechanical precision of a targeting system acquiring a lock. Hey, buddy, Marissa said cheerfully. Chomps tilted his head. Then he stood up, stretched in the way that predators do when they're warming up their murder muscles, and walked over to the glass. He sat down directly in front of Marissa and stared at her. She stared back. This is normal behavior, Vexillar announced to the class, though his voice had taken on the slightly high-pitched quality of someone who suspected normalcy had left the building several minutes ago. The juvenile is assessing a potential threat. We will observe the interaction for precisely 30 seconds before moving to the next demonstration. Marissa pressed her hand against the glass. Chomps pressed his paw against the glass from the other side. Oh my God, Marissa said. Oh my God, he's doing the thing. What thing? Clicks whispered nervously. The adorable thing. That is not adorable, Harvest Moon over still waters hissed. That is threat assessment. He is calculating whether she would be worth the effort to hunt. He's giving me a high five through the glass. Marissa was practically vibrating with joy. Vexillar made an executive decision. Miss Chen, please step back from the enclosure. But, Miss Chen. She stepped back, looking like someone who'd just been told Christmas was canceled. Chomps remained pressed against the glass, following her movement with his eyes. His tail, which had been still, began to twitch back and forth in a slow, purposeful pattern. Instructor, Ragoth said carefully, is that normal? Vexillar looked at Chomps, then at Marissa, then back at Chomps. No, he admitted. No, that is not normal. What's he doing? Marissa asked, with the excited tone of someone who had clearly missed the not normal part. He is displaying hunting interest, Vexillar said flatly. In you specifically. Oh, he likes me. That is not what that means. But Marissa was already grinning at Chomps like they were new best friends. And Chomps was staring at her with the unblinking intensity of a creature that had just identified something very interesting to chase. And Vexillar felt the first twinges of what would eventually become a very comprehensive stress headache. The situation, as situations involving humans tend to do, escalated. Week 6 brought them to Facility Wing 7, where the larger specimens were kept. This was the part of the course where students learned about safety protocols, not through observation, but through visceral, adrenaline-soaked experience. It was carefully managed, heavily supervised. Absolutely nothing could go wrong. Vexillar really should have knocked on some wood, if he had hands that could knock on wood. The metaphor was getting away from him. The specimen for today's lesson was a 3-year-old Vicarian shadow cat named Princess. The name, Vexillar explained with the weariness of someone who had long since given up on fighting the administrative decisions of others, had been mandated by the donor who had funded the facility's expansion and who apparently had very strong opinions about nomenclature. Princess was not actually a cat in the Earth sense, though she was feline adjacent in the way that a tornado is wind adjacent. She was approximately 400 kilograms of muscle, fang, and what could only be described as malicious creativity when it came to hunting strategies. Vicarian shadow cats, Vexillar announced to the assembled class, who were currently standing behind a very impressive array of force fields, are considered one of the 3 most dangerous predators in the known galaxy. They are capable of limited optical camouflage, can detect heartbeats from 50 meters away, and have been documented problem-solving at a level comparable to sentient species. Princess has been trained since birth to tolerate proximity to researchers. But she is not tame, she is not safe, and she is absolutely not to be approached without proper authorization and supervision. What if she approaches us? Marissa asked. You run, Vexillar said simply. You run, you activate your emergency beacon, and you pray to whatever deities your species acknowledges that she is not particularly hungry that day. Got it. Don't get eaten. I am pleased your survival instincts are finally manifesting, Miss Chen. That should have been Vexillar's first warning. Humans, he was learning, tended to go quiet right before they did something that would require incident reports. The exercise was straightforward. Students would observe Princess in her habitat, document her hunting behaviors when presented with various stimuli, and maintain appropriate distance at all times. Simple, safe, boring even, which in this context was exactly what Vexillar wanted. Princess lounged on an artificial rock formation, like liquid shadow given form. Her fur, dark as the space between stars, rippled with patterns that hurt to look at directly. Her eyes, when they opened, were the color of molten copper and held the kind of intelligence that made you remember that humanity's fear of being watched from the darkness was not paranoia, but inherited wisdom. For 30 minutes, everything proceeded normally. Princess yawned. Princess stretched. Princess knocked over an enrichment toy with the disdain of a creature who had no need for such frivolities. Educational gold. Then Marissa's communicator chirped. It was a small sound, a tiny, insignificant electronic beep that would have been meaningless in any other context. But in a facility designed to house apex predators, where every sense was honed to detect the slightest indication of prey, it might as well have been a dinner bell. Princess's head snapped up. Her ears, which had been relaxed, swiveled forward. Her pupils dilated from slits to dark pools. And then, with the fluid grace of something that existed just slightly outside normal physics, she moved. Not toward Marissa. That would have been manageable. Force fields existed for a reason. No. Princess moved to the side of her enclosure and did something that the facility's designers had insisted was theoretically impossible, but that Princess apparently had not read the manual about. She triggered the emergency release on her own enclosure door, from the inside. "Containment breach!" Vexillar shouted, his voice cracking in a way that he would be mortified about later when reviewing the security footage. "Activate Protocol 7. All students evacuate to the designated safe zones immediately." Chaos erupted. Students scattered like particles in a supernova. Alarms blared. Emergency force fields slammed into place, creating a maze of barriers between Princess and the fleeing students. Somewhere, automated systems were screaming for security teams. And Marissa Chen, because of course she did, stood perfectly still. "Miss Chen!" Vexillar screamed. "Move!" "I don't want to trigger her chase instinct," Marissa said calmly, as if she were discussing weather patterns and not staring down 400 kilograms of evolutionary perfectionism. She is an apex predator. Everything triggers her chase instinct. That is the point of being an apex predator. But Marissa didn't move. She just stood there, watching Princess with the same focused attention that Princess was using to watch her. The shadow cat had frozen mid-step, one paw raised, her entire body coiled like a spring made of knives and poor life choices. They stared at each other. "Nice kitty," Marissa said softly. "That is not a kitty." Vexillar was somewhere between 3 different heart attacks. "That is a hyper-efficient killing machine wrapped in fur." Princess took a step forward. Then another. She was moving slowly now. Deliberately, each paw placed with the precision of a surgeon performing a delicate operation. Her tail swayed back and forth in a hypnotic pattern. Her eyes never left Marissa's face. The security team burst into the corridor, weapons raised, tranquilizers loaded. "Don't move!" the team leader shouted, though it was unclear whether he was talking to Marissa or Princess. Princess's lips pulled back, revealing teeth that evolution had spent millions of years perfecting for the express purpose of making other species reconsider their life choices. It was not a smile. It was not a threat display. It was worse. It was curiosity. "She's beautiful," Marissa whispered. "She is going to eat you." Vexillar had abandoned all pretense of professional composure. "No, she's not." Marissa slowly, carefully, deliberately, tilted her head to the side. Princess tilted her head to the side. Marissa tilted her head to the other side. Princess tilted her head to the other side. "What?" said the security team leader. "In the name of every deity and every pantheon across all of known space, is happening right now?" "I think they're bonding," Harvest Moon over still waters said from behind a barrier, sounding like someone watching a religious experience they didn't quite understand. That is not bonding. That is... Vexillar stopped. He didn't actually know what that was. Princess sat down, right there in the corridor, surrounded by enough firepower to stun a small warship, with alarms blaring and everyone screaming. She just sat down and looked at Marissa with what could only be described as interest. Marissa grinned. Good girl. Princess, 400 kilograms of apex predator, made a sound. It was a small sound, a curious sound. A sound that was probably the Vicarian Shadowcat equivalent of, huh, that's weird. Then she stood up, turned around, and walked back into her enclosure like nothing had happened. The door sealed behind her. Silence fell like a hammer. Miss Chen, Vexillar said, his voice very small and very tired. My office. Now. The fallout from the Princess incident, as it came to be known in Academy records filed under "We really need to reconsider our human admission policies," was extensive. There were incident reports. There were safety reviews. There were long meetings where administrators used words like liability and insurability and what were we thinking? But there was also data. Fascinating, unprecedented data about interspecies predator response patterns that had the xenobiology department practically vibrating with academic excitement. Because here was the thing. Princess, one of the 3 most dangerous predators in known space, had displayed curiosity toward a human. Not aggression, not hunting interest. Curiosity. And that, according to 17 different research papers that would be published over the following cycle, was weird. I've been reviewing the literature, Marissa said during her disciplinary meeting with Vexillar and the Academy Dean. Most galactic species evolved as prey animals or specialized predators in very specific niches. Humans are weird because we're persistence hunters who also do ambush predation, who also have traits of pack hunters, who also can survive basically anywhere. We're like evolutionary jazz. We just improvise. That, said Dean Zixthara, a being of pure energy, held together by force fields and mounting anxiety, is not helping your case. No, but here's the thing. Marissa leaned forward, animated now. Princess recognized something in me. Not prey, not threat, something else. Because humans aren't just predators. We're predators who domesticated other predators. We befriended wolves and turned them into dogs. We literally looked at apex predators and said, I'm going to make you love me. Vexillar felt something click in his mind. A terrible, wonderful, absolutely horrifying understanding. You're not taking this course to learn about predators. Nope. You're taking this course because you want to befriend them. Yep. All of them. That's the plan. Dean Zixthara's force field flickered. Absolutely not. With respect, Dean, Marissa said, pulling out a datapad. I've prepared a research proposal. Interspecies apex predator social bonding, an exploration of cross-species recognition and trust building. I even have 3 faculty sponsors. She did. Vexillar had checked. Somehow, impossibly, she had convinced 3 professors that this wasn't the worst idea since someone decided to try teaching Kelviran poetry through interpretive combat. This is insane, Vexillar said weakly. This is science, Marissa countered. Look, every species here evolved to be afraid of predators. That's normal, that's survival. But humans are different. We co-evolved with predators. We competed with them, we respected them, and eventually, we made them family. That's our superpower. Not that we're tough, though we are, but that we can look at something designed to eat us and think, I bet we could be friends. That is not a superpower. Dean Zixithara said. That is a death wish with extra steps. Maybe, Marissa admitted. But think about the applications. If we can understand how humans build bonds with apex predators, we might be able to develop better protocols for wildlife management, captive breeding programs, even first contact scenarios with unknown species. This isn't just about me wanting to pet dangerous animals, though I do want that. It's about understanding something fundamental about human psychology that the galaxy doesn't quite get yet. There was a long pause. If you get eaten, Vexlar said finally, I will be very upset. Deal. And you will maintain all safety protocols. Absolutely. And you will work directly with me on documenting everything. I was hoping you'd say that. Vexlar looked at Dean Zixithara. Dean Zixithara's force field pulsed in what was probably the energy being equivalent of a migraine. Fine, the Dean said. But the first sign of trouble, I'll back off. Promise. That promise, Vexlar would later reflect, lasted approximately 12 days. The turning point came during week 9, when the class was introduced to what was essentially the final boss of the Apex Predator curriculum, a juvenile Corthian render named, and Vexlar wished he were joking, Mr. Snuggles. Corthian renders were not meant to be juvenile. They were not meant to be contained. They were barely meant to exist in the same reality as softer, squishier life forms. They were apex predators from a Class 15 hazard world where the atmosphere was partially sulfuric acid, and the local ecosystem had apparently been designed by a committee of sadists. Mr. Snuggles was only 9 months old and already massed 200 kilograms of scales, claws, and pure distilled murder. This specimen, Vexlar announced with the gravity of someone delivering a eulogy, represents the culmination of our coursework. Observation only. No approach, no interaction, simply document and learn. Mr. Snuggles chose that moment to smash his enclosure toy into gravel. The sound was like a small explosion. Beautiful, Marissa breathed. Miss Chen, I know. Observation only. But Vexlar knew that tone. It was the tone humans got right before they tried something that would either change history or require medical intervention, sometimes both. For 45 minutes, everything was fine. Mr. Snuggles ignored the class. The class nervously documented Mr. Snuggles. Even the emergency equipment stayed quiet. It was almost boring. Then Mr. Snuggles looked up, directly at Marissa, and did something that neither Vexlar nor any of the 17 specialists monitoring the session had ever seen a Corthian render do. He approached the force field, deliberately, carefully, and sat down, right in front of her. That's weird, right? Clicks whispered. That's not normal behavior. Nothing about this class has been normal since the human arrived, Ragoth muttered. Marissa stepped forward, before Vexlar could stop her, before anyone could stop her. She walked right up to the force field and knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with 200 kilograms of predatory perfection. Mr. Snuggles tilted his head. Hey, buddy, Marissa said softly. Mr. Snuggles opened his mouth, and Vexlar felt his heart stop because this was it. This was the threat display. This was where the juvenile render would demonstrate exactly why his species was considered unsuitable for captive study and why the board had required 17 different liability waivers. Mr. Snuggles yawned. Did he just, Harvest Moon over still waters said slowly, did he just yawn? Yawning in Corthian renders, Vexlar said faintly, pulling up files on his datapad with shaking hands, is not a sign of fatigue. It is a threat display designed to showcase dental armament and jaw strength. He's just sleepy, Marissa said confidently. Look at his eyes. He's relaxed. His eyes look like they're calculating which organ to eat first. No. See the way his nictitating membranes are half closed? That's contentment. And his claws are retracted. He's not threatening me. He's curious. How? Vexlar asked the universe at large. Do you know this? I had a cat once. Same basic principle. That is not the same basic principle. But Mr. Snuggles was now doing something that made Vexlar question his entire understanding of xenobiology. He was purring. Not the cute purr of an earth cat. No, this was a sound like grinding tectonic plates, a rumble that you felt in your bones before you heard it. A vibration that reminded you that this creature's ancestors had hunted in the dark places of a world where mercy was a concept that evolution had specifically selected against. And Marissa was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. I'm going to befriend you so hard, she told Mr. Snuggles. Please don't, Vexlar whispered. But nobody was listening to him anymore. The rest of the semester was, to put it mildly, educational. For everyone involved, but perhaps most of all for Vexlar, who discovered that his capacity for stress was far greater than he'd previously believed possible. Marissa worked with Chomps, who learned to play fetch in a way that was technically against all established understanding of Thoraxian ridge stalker behavior. She worked with Princess, who started deliberately showing off her hunting techniques in what could only be described as teaching behavior. She even worked with Mr. Snuggles, who developed what the research team hesitantly labeled as affectionate recognition responses whenever Marissa was nearby. The data was extraordinary. The implications were profound. The stress on Vexlar's cardiovascular system was immeasurable. I still don't understand, Vexlar said one day, watching Marissa play what could only be described as tug-of-war with Chomps through a reinforced barrier. What is it about humans that makes this possible? I think, Marissa said, not looking away from Chomps, it's because we remember what it was like. Being prey, I mean, way back when we were just another animal on the savannah and everything wanted to eat us. We remember that fear, but we also remember deciding that fear wasn't enough, that we could do better. So we learned, we adapted, we figured out that the things trying to eat us were just doing their job, same as us. No malice, just survival. She tugged on the toy. Chomps tugged back, making happy growling sounds. And then, somewhere along the way, we realized something incredible. These apex predators, these perfect killing machines, they had something we wanted. Loyalty, partnership, family. So we offered them a deal. Hunt with us, not against us. Share our fire, protect our children. We'll feed you, we'll care for you, we'll love you. And they accepted? Vexlar asked. Some of them did. The wolves who became dogs. The cats who decided we were useful to keep around. And that partnership changed everything. It changed them, it changed us. We became something new together. Chomps dropped his end of the toy and pressed against the barrier, making a sound that the research team's translation matrix labeled as contentment with social bonding context. So when I look at these guys, Marissa continued, scratching the barrier where Chomps was pressed against it, I don't just see predators. I see potential partners. Beings who might not understand our weird human nonsense, but who recognize that we're offering something real. Respect, trust, friendship. That is, Vexlar said slowly, absolutely insane. Yeah, Marissa agreed cheerfully, but it's also very, very human. The final exam for Apex Predator Behavioral Studies was traditionally a written assessment. Theories, classifications, safety protocols. Boring but safe. Vexlar changed it. The new final exam involved each student spending 30 supervised minutes in an observation session with a predator of their choice, documenting behaviors and demonstrating proper safety awareness. Controlled, educational. And, for the first time in 400 cycles, actually interesting. When it was Marissa's turn, she chose to work with all three of them, Chomps, Princess, and Mr. Snuggles, in sequential sessions. "That's not standard procedure," Dean Zix-Thara said, watching the proceedings from the safety of the observation deck. "Nothing about this has been standard procedure," Vexlar replied. "We might as well document it properly. The session with Chomps was playful, educational. Chomps showed off his hunting behaviors, accepted treats from Marissa through a dispenser, and even demonstrated learned behaviors that weren't in his species' normal repertoire. Textbook example of successful human-predator interaction. The session with Princess was elegant. The shadow cat moved through her environment like liquid darkness, showing Marissa her camouflage abilities, her problem-solving skills, her hunting strategies. And at the end, she did something unprecedented. She deliberately brought one of her toys to the barrier and left it there for Marissa. A gift from an apex predator to a human. But it was the session with Mr. Snuggles that would become legend. Marissa entered his observation area, not the enclosure, but the monitored space adjacent to it, and sat down. Just sat. No interaction, no treats, just presence. Mr. Snuggles watched her for exactly 14 seconds. Then he did something that made every researcher present immediately start writing papers. He mimicked her. He sat down in the same posture, tilted his head at the same angle, even adjusted his tail to roughly match the position of her legs. "Is he?" Clicks whispered from the observation deck. "Is he trying to communicate?" "He's mirroring her," Harvest Moon over Stillwater said, awe evident in their voice. "That's learned behavior, social behavior. That's what pack hunters do." "Korthian renders are solitary predators," Vexlar said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe they don't have to be," Marissa said softly, her voice carrying through the monitoring system. "Maybe they're just waiting for someone to show them something different." Mr. Snuggles stood up, walked to the barrier between them, and very carefully, very deliberately, pressed his massive head against the force field where Marissa's hand was. "Nice try, big guy," Marissa said, grinning. "But we both know that force field isn't going anywhere. Safety first." Mr. Snuggles made a sound that the translation matrix had no reference for. It sounded almost like laughter. The semester ended with Marissa Chen receiving the highest marks in the history of the Apex Predator Behavioral Studies course. Her research proposal was approved. 3 different departments wanted to recruit her for graduate studies. And Vexlar, despite everything, despite the stress and the terror and the 17 different times he'd been certain he was about to watch a student become a snack, was proud. "You changed everything," he told her on the last day of class. "You showed us something about humans that we didn't understand. That capacity for connection across species boundaries. It's remarkable." "Thanks," Marissa said. "But honestly, I think every species has this capacity. You all just forgot it because you evolved in different ways. But deep down, the ability to look at something different and see not a threat, but a potential friend, that's not uniquely human. That's just being alive and choosing to be brave about it." "Perhaps," Vexlar said, "but you're the one who reminded us." Chomps chose that moment to escape his handlers again, he'd gotten very good at that, and bounded over to Marissa, making happy noises that sounded like rocks in a blender. She laughed and scratched behind his ears. in the spot that really shouldn't have been an erogenous zone for a Thoraxian ridge stalker, but apparently was anyway. "So," Vexlar asked, "what's next for you?" "Well," Marissa said, grinning in that way that meant she had an idea that would give everyone involved stress disorders. "I heard there's a research station studying void whales in the Kepler sector, and apparently they're having trouble with aggressive behavior during mating season. Those are kilometer-long spacefaring creatures with hide that can withstand micrometeorite impacts." "I know. Isn't it exciting?" Vexlar looked at her. Looked at Chomps, who was now attempting to climb into Marissa's lap, despite being far too large for such activities. Looked at Princess, who was watching from her enclosure with what he could now recognize as affectionate interest. Looked at Mr. Snuggles, who was pressing against his barrier and making that weird purring grinding sound that meant he wanted attention. "Humans," Vexlar said finally, "are absolutely terrifying." "Yeah," Marissa agreed cheerfully, "but we're also pretty great at making friends." "And really?" Vexlar thought, watching a human cuddle with an apex predator that outweighed her 3 times over, that pretty much summed up humanity's place in the galaxy. Terrifying, inexplicable, and somehow against all logic and reason, making the universe a little bit brighter by being in it, even if they did insist on befriending things that could eat them. Especially because they insisted on befriending things that could eat them. Because that was the thing about humans, Vexlar had learned. They looked at the vast, dangerous, beautiful universe and said, "I bet we could be friends with that." And somehow, impossibly, they usually were.